You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious episode of the Assembly Call. As tonight, your Indiana Hoosiers did not comfortably win, but won a road game at the Barn, 84-79 over Minnesota, in a game that IU led by as many as 27 points in the second half. The offense played as well as it has for a long stretch there. And then all of a sudden, IU relaxed a little bit. Minnesota got incredibly hot. And all right, well, hang on. Let me see if I can get my audio figured out and we can start the show. Is it better now?
You're better now. Keep going.
All right. Well, I tell you what, let's do this. I can at least fix the podcast part. I can't fix the YouTube part, but I can fix the podcast part. So I'll let me stop this and we'll restart that and we'll relive the excitement of this of talking about this win just slightly once again. So all right, here goes. Take two.
You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious episode of the Assembly Call. As tonight, your Indiana Hoosiers went on the road and picked up a huge win at Minnesota, 84-79, in a game that IU led by as many as 27 in the second half. Relaxed a little bit. Minnesota got incredibly hot from three-point range and cut it to a three-point game at one point in the final seconds before Xavier Johnson stepped up and knocked down a couple free throws to ice it. This is a game that we'll certainly talk a little bit about what contributed to the lull from IU, and so we'll talk about that. But I think the big focus for me is if you told me at the beginning of the day that IU was going to go and pull out this win by 5 points, I probably would have been pretty happy about it. It was essentially a must win for IU in this scenario. And so when I look at it that way, I think it is how I'll try to frame it up, although we can't ignore what happened to get the game that close as we went. But so we'll talk through that as we go. But a huge win for IU at this point in the season. Xavier Johnson leads the way with 24 points for IU, had a stellar first half. And as I mentioned a minute ago, knocked down the free throws that iced the game. So in terms of starting the show with a banner moment, I had a bunch of these highlighted early when things were going incredibly well. I don't know which one to really go back to. I'll pick one early in the second half. This is one Minnesota had just made a three-pointer, their first of what would be many three-pointers in the second half. But in a sequence where Trayce Jackson-Davis got fouled, he missed the second free throw. Parker Stewart hustles to get the rebound, ends up making a three on the possession, and then on the defensive end made one of a few good defensive plays that he made, really trying to dig down into the post, got a steal, and just thought that was a really important sequence from Parker. Also was one that really gave IU some momentum to start the second half. And there was a stretch where IU, much like Minnesota, would get into a stretch where IU was scoring on virtually every possession. The offense looked really crisp. You had a number of guys involved, but I'll go back to that one from Parker Stewart. And I'll give another Parker Stewart one somewhat late as the wheels seem to be coming off. He showed some good patience, found Race Thompson for a dunk to kind of stem the tide a little bit in that stretch. So I thought a couple of big plays from him. Xavier Johnson was the headliner tonight, but some good supporting plays from Parker Stewart there, which we will use as tonight's banner moment. And our banner moment today, as always, brought to you by our friends at Homefield Apparel, who is now in their 5th season of sponsoring the Assembly Call, and their first is as the presenting sponsor for the Back Home Network. And as you surely know by now, Homefield has the largest collection of vintage IU apparel that you'll find anywhere, with beloved logos like 2 different versions of the Bison. And if you support other college teams or have people in your life who do, Homefield probably has something for them as well. Their product line now extends to more than 120 different schools with unique vintage logos for all of them, including some of the ones that have just come out for this season of Big New Saturday, which includes Villanova, that was released on Saturday. But no matter what you buy, know that it will be comfortable and the colors will last through many washings. And also for those IU fans out there, you're supporting an Indiana-based company that came up through Kelly. So what could be better than that? Go to homefieldapparel.com and use our promo code HOME to get 15% off your entire first order. Again, that's promo code HOME to 15% off. Once again, the website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. All right, it's time to move the ball, find the open man, and get some opening thoughts from the rest of our team, which tonight is Coach Tonsoni and Galen Clavio of Crimson Cast. So, Coach, I'll throw it to you first. Opening thoughts on this comfortable IU victory, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, a really great effort for 32 minutes. I mean, just outstanding effort, both offensively and defensively tonight by the Indiana Hoosiers, which was something that, I think the last 3 games, Indiana started moving more, moving people more, moving the ball more. Xavier Johnson was outstanding. And so Indiana built a 27-point lead. I know everyone's upset about giving up a 27-point lead, but we got to remember that they built a 27-point lead. And obviously we wish it would have stayed there for the net rating and all that kind of stuff that goes with a wider margin victory. But winning on the Big Ten is difficult. And Wisconsin, 1-by-1, pulled out a win at the barn just recently. Ohio State got beat today on the road at Maryland. Winning on the road is tough. And so ultimately this game helps Indiana's resume, gives it a quad 2 win, another road win, and Indiana is closer to being in the tournament than they were before the game tipped off. So after the stressful end, I think we can look back and say Indiana has, kind of corrected its errors from the 5-game losing streak, and it at least gives the program a chance to have a big win against Rutgers.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those where I even said this at halftime. I think you can lament the fact that the lead wasn't bigger at the half. You can, and no different than that, you can lament the way they let Minnesota get back in the game. But at the same time, I think to expect anything close to perfection this team is probably something that we should all not get too hung up on. And like I said, we'll talk about the near collapse late, but I'm focusing on a road win that they really needed for their tournament resume and everything else. So like I said, you can't gloss over the fact that they gave away the lead, but like you said,
well, and I would say, Andy,
lead of that size to begin with.
As much as they gave away the lead, Minnesota took away the lead. I mean, that kid hit 3 threes down the stretch that were absolutely more than contested. Sometimes guys hit tough shots. If he doesn't hit those 3, Indiana wins 12 to 14 point win, right? But he just rose up over a shot. So there was part of the reason was Indiana relaxed and turned the ball over on offense. But I thought that a couple of those threes, those kids just threw in some threes, and that's going to happen. That's why it's nice to have that kind of lead when a guy like that gets hot.
Yep. All right, Galen, throw it to you for your opening thoughts on the win. Gave you some time to let your heart rate come back down. So
yeah,
hop in. What are your feelings having a few minutes to digest what you just saw?
I got to be honest, my heart rate didn't go up. I just expected this to happen. I just waited, and look what appeared on our doorstep: a blown lead and a far too close finish. Look, this is. I guess I would call this a Rorschach test game for IU fans, because you can kind of read anything you want out of it. You can go the positive route and say, hey, they picked up a 5-point win on the road. They covered. They won at a place that historically they don't win. They got that all-important 18th win. They're 9-9 in conference, which means that the worst they're going to finish is 9-11 in the regular season, and they have a great chance now of going 10-10. They got a great game out of Xavier Johnson, who just continues to be, in my opinion, the most important player on this team on both offense and defense. They got a great game out of Jordan Geronimo, who had basically been on a sabbatical for a month from playing basketball of any reasonable sort. And, and Miller Kopp, hit his second highest point total of the season, first time back in double figures since the Syracuse game. So there's lots of things you could point to, and you could say this is nice. But man, the downside is this team just continues to find new ways to make you feel like they're just going to give it all away at any point during every game. And, this, as I tweeted earlier, this is why we have trust issues with this IU basketball team. And look, I think I know Coach was trying to take the positive side there, but this team really needed the boost in the power rankings. I mean, as much of a boost as they got off of that Maryland game where they far exceeded their normal offensive points per possession, and it shot them up like 8 points in KenPom. God, to have won by 20 or 30 points would have really had a positive impact on that rating, on BPI. And, unfortunately, this team has dribbled away so much of the season that they are now in a dogfight for an NCAA tournament spot. And you've got conference tournament season coming up. They can't afford to give these opportunities away. So you can take out of it what you want. I still haven't decided what I want to think out of this game yet.
That's definitely fair. I like your
winning's hard though, everyone's correct. This was a scary situation, not good, not the way you wanted to end a great performance. But winning is brutally hard at every level of basketball. And the ultimate thing is a win. Yes, we'd want every win to be, absolutely perfect. And we were very close to a perfect win. And then it just went totally the other way. But winning is brutally hard at every level. I've been doing it for 28 years and have taken my fair shares of tough losses. It's difficult. And so it's much better than if they totally blew the game. Then that would have been a real bad show. But, kudos to them. I do want to mention something real quick. Jack Watts put this in the chat, and I think it's something that was, Rob comes back and hit a three, and he was not aggressive early. Then he was aggressive a little bit later and hit a shot, and then he missed one. And at the timeout, Woodson kind of let into him about taking a shot after only one pass, and he pointed to the scoreboard. And that's when the wheels fell off. And I'm not putting the blame on Woody, but sometimes we as coaches can get in the way of our own team too. Hey, we're a 27-point team. Take your time. We got the lead. And all of a sudden, the whole team's aggressiveness just fell off. And Jack makes that comment. I think that's very, very good. Sometimes you can play too safe, even with the 27-point lead. And I think a combination of those things probably happened there towards the end.
Yeah, I think so. Well, all right, let's talk about some of the good first. We'll circle back to the other part here in a couple minutes. But I think the place you got to start here is Xavier Johnson. Galen, you mentioned this as you got started. He ends the game with 24 points, 6 rebounds, 8 assists, only 1 turnover. And I just thought, again, really came out and set the tone on the offensive end and really tried to get into Peyton Willis early. Got called for a foul and a 3-pointer, but continued to be really aggressive defensively to the point where I was very concerned that he was going to pick up his second foul pretty quickly. He managed not to do that, and really played under control in the first half. Made some nice passes, took shots when they were there. May have taken a couple wild ones driving to the basket, but I think you're going to have to live with some of that with him. But again, was really the tone setter for IU, and even late in the game, was the guy that stepped up. He went 1 of 2, a couple trips to the free throw line. Both of them, the second miss kind of rimmed out, was right on, and has become a more reliable free throw shooter, but hit the 2 there at the end to put it away. And I just thought another really, really strong performance from Xavier Johnson as he continues to really grow into his role. And as you said, I think is pretty clearly establishing himself as the most important guy on this team.
He's managed. It's fascinating. I didn't believe this when someone told me. I had to look it up. He's actually leading IU in possessions used. He's ahead of Trace Jackson Davis. He's ahead of Romeo Langford in the one season that Romeo Langford was at IU in possessions used, which I didn't think was humanly possible. But we've needed that these last few games out of Xavier Johnson. 3 straight games in double figures, 16 points in the Ohio State game, 24 against Maryland, 24 tonight against Minnesota. And look, I think the biggest criticism that you can have of this IU team is that they are constantly in this battle against passivity on offense. It's like this gravitational pull that we've seen for a few years now, where you look at other teams, athletic teams, the way that they play on offense, many of them look like they're constantly moving. They're in positions where they're doing things, and IU just tends to slide back into what we've seen for the last several years of let's stand around and pass to one guy and see if that guy can shoot. And Xavier Johnson's like the one player that you can always count on is not going to voluntarily do that. He drives when he can. He looks for opportunities. Sometimes he goes overboard. And I mean, at the beginning of this game, I was a little bit concerned because you're always worried you're going to get wild card Xavier Johnson as opposed to, a more like reasonable Xavier Johnson. But he really settled into his role in this game. And so when I think about where Indiana would be right now this season without him, I do really like wonder what's that alternate reality look like. And you consider that this was the first game he's had a backup point guard even to come in and give him a few spare minutes over the course of the last few games. So I don't have enough superlatives for what he was able to do overall in this contest. 8 assists, 1 turnover, and 24 points is just a tremendous outing for a point guard, and it's exactly what IU needed.
Yeah, Coach, thoughts on X tonight?
Just fantastic. I mean, the game is a guard's game, and he's just taking over. And he's doing a nice job of taking shots that are available to him, that are good shots. He took a couple, that I thought were quick or falling away in the paint. But you almost want people to do that if you're going to be aggressive. But his step-in 3 has been really nice. I think he's up over 36% on the season. That's good. I really liked the one play where he drove the lane and played off 2 feet. Didn't force a shot and hit Tamar for Tamar's 3 on the wing. As you guys mentioned, the number of assists. He can score and he can be a playmaker. That combination is going to make Indiana's offense better, which it needs to be because it's been so poor for most of the season. And the last 2 games, yes, it's Maryland and Minnesota. We got to remember that. But again, we had good portions against Wisconsin, Ohio State, and just lost games late. So this is, X is a little more mentally tough the last few games, consistently mentally tough, doing some things. He got a little loose with it, as did everyone in the last few minutes of the game. But, man, you understand why he was brought into this program. You understand that great X is really good for Indiana.
Yeah, I think with him, and this is a little bit of you talked about this a little bit too, with just being able to get out and the way that he can push the pace and force the issue a little bit. He had the great pass to Geronimo coming down the lane on a break. And I think ultimately I was going to wait and talk about this as the kind of third storyline, but I guess let's talk about the last part of it. I think a portion of what it was that IU just started wanting the clock to run out, and Woodson got pissed at Phinisee for taking the 3-pointer. And I kind of get it. It's off of one pass. There's 25 seconds left. I totally understand. But I don't know that the one he took the possession or 2 before that was off too many more passes than that. It was a good shot. IU was playing at a reasonably good pace. Minnesota was not playing good defense and giving IU a lot of what they wanted offensively. And I thought they kind of got in their own way a little bit with just trying to let the clock run out, and they got away. There's got to be a balance there of, yes, the clock is your friend in that scenario, but you can't totally get away from everything that you did during the rest of it. Now, the flip side of that is I thought Minnesota got hot in the same way that IU got hot in the first half, where you see a couple go in the basket and everything and it opens up, and Minnesota's playing with no pressure whatsoever. At that point, you're down 25, throw a couple shots in, they go up, you get some confidence. I'm not saying that IU didn't contribute to that confidence in terms of the way that they play defense, but and then IU just got really lax with the ball. TJD had 3, they had 10 turnovers in the game. They had 4 of them really close together in a stretch between like Rob and TJD. But Galen, what do you clearly, the look on your face says you clearly have thoughts about what contributed to that sequence.
Well,
I'll throw it to you first.
I think it's a little bit of what you said, but I just think they got lazy. And I mean, maybe lazy is too pejorative of a term, but this team loses focus so easily. We see it time and time and time again. Sometimes it's in smaller spurts, and we've seen it certainly on the road, whether it was the game at Wisconsin or the game at Iowa or the game at Ohio State. They just have this tendency to switch off at entirely the wrong times. But I think it was exacerbated here because it would happen on both ends of the floor. And it wasn't just the turnovers. It was just what makes this team work is how hard they play defense. They were getting lauded for their defensive intensity on the telecast, and rightfully so in the first half. They made life really difficult. And then they just let their foot completely off the gas. And Minnesota's like, well, we're not done playing. And you combine that with the very sloppy play that they had on the offensive end and the inability to catch the ball when it's thrown and, poor shot selection. This is a constant issue with this roster. And it's something that, again, it stretches back before this year, I think. But I don't think it was a case of them I think certainly they were like, oh, okay, we got this. We're up by 20 something. But it just fit a pattern we've seen out of IU basketball in so many other games that we've seen, not just this year, but in the last couple of years, that I don't know what the answer to it is, but it's annoying when you see it. And I think it's why people have such a hair trigger with this team, because they've seen it so many times.
Coach, what do you attribute it to?
I think it's a combination of lost focus by the players being up, and also the emphasis was to eat some clock and be patient, and that subliminally in the minds, then everyone just let go. And Galen's absolutely correct. Defensive intensity waned. The offensive ability, the offensive focus. TJD caught a ball that was a nice pass, and it just went through his hands. Then he dribbled into three guys. Teams that don't have good concentration and focus play bad, and that's that combination with the hot shooting of Minnesota, the incredible shooting of Minnesota, made it a much tighter game than it should have been. But that's it's the old prevent defense in football. It prevents you from winning. You're not going to blitz in some situations. You're not going to keep trying to shoot in the first 5 seconds of a shot clock. It's not bad strategy, but you've got to have a mature team in order to handle it. And I think Galen's absolutely correct that the basketball maturity of this group has been in question for some time now, multiple years, and this season with playing consistent basketball, and it reared up its ugly head again today. But when you're up 27 and you want to run clock, then that you sit back on defense and think the next guy's going to switch or take this close out, or you don't have to box out and don't have to rebound. And when a team gets hot and the water finds its level type stuff, and you get a kid who's this stuff happens, and you can't do that to win consistently. And that's been part of what Indiana's been fighting, and playing well and then losing late games to Wisconsin, playing well and losing late games to Ohio State. It's 40 minutes of hard concentration of playing the right way, regardless of the scoreboard. And coaches have to be aware of what they say that affects it, and players have to be aware of their mentality, because if you're the best team, you're going to play 40 minutes, 30, 31, games during the season, or most of those games. And Indiana is obviously not one of them, but unfortunately Indiana won. So, but that lost focus, and the clock issue was added to it, I think.
And I'll chip in on this. I mean, everybody wants to assign a certain percentage of blame one way or another. Is it players? Was it Woodson? I mean, look, I think Woodson deserves some blame in this one. I think he thinks this team is a lot more mature and advanced in the way that they approach the game of basketball than they actually are. And he's used to dealing with professional basketball players who, even on the Knicks, have like some modicum of understanding of what you're supposed to do, as a professional basketball player. And we've seen several times this season a group that just gets lost out on the floor and needs basically to be like pulled aside and told what to do. And I felt like Woodson spent a lot of timeouts early on in the season doing exactly that, and it had pretty good results overall. And then as the season's gone along, as I think is reasonable to expect, he's been like, all right, you guys know enough. I've told you enough times. You got to figure it out yourself. And yet they really don't have the ability to figure out themselves. It seems like you have to have the timeouts. You have to have like the little stoppages where you pull them back in and re-instruct them on things. And look, it certainly looks like something Woodson's not used to doing, but he's going to have to figure it out with this group, because I don't see them suddenly finding religion here over the last 3 or 4 games of the season.
Galen, I think you're spot on with that. There's one thing to trust your players and trust your team, but there's also you could have guys you like, but you need to guide them. And I think the college game needs more guidance. Even your better programs see coaches calling sets. Schools have the whiteboards with the sets up. They call timeout when it's an 8-0 run or a 10-0 run to calm the team down. It's one of my favorite features of some of the television coverage of when they have the live mic in the timeouts. And a lot of it is not X's and O's. It's just kind of guiding these guys to what needs to be done to play. And And I think that is the biggest adjustment that Woodson is having this year, is that he's used to guys knowing what needs to be done. The X's and O's thing seems to be working out, but even veteran teams need some of that guidance at the collegiate level. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think that the only other point that I wanted to bring up was, they made a big deal on the broadcast, like the way that Woodson used timeouts. He did call one in the midst of that run, but he kind of let him play it out there toward the end. And I don't know if that is his way of saying, you guys are going to have to figure out how to win some of these games that come down this way eventually. And he was willing to, kind of ride it out in that scenario. But, I think he took one right before the under 4 timeout, but I don't know that he took another one. And so because I think they came back and they said something to Hummel about it. And he said, well, I'll tell you if I think it's a good decision in 2 minutes and 50 seconds when I see if they won or not. I don't know, Coach, did you kind of interpret that as him just saying, hey, you guys got to figure this out? He keeps talking about how to get him over the hump and some of that stuff, of just saying it's on you guys at this point to figure out, or
I think that's absolutely what he was doing. I don't know that I agree with it, but I will.
And I don't know if it has the desired effect other than winning this game. I don't know that the next time this happens, they feel any more confident.
Right. I think, he's been trying to get these guys to finish late games, and he's just going to say, you're going to have to figure it out. The concern for me is in late game situations, we go back to the heavy emphasis on feeding the post and standing still, and other teams are defending it when we've run good stuff most of the last 3 games. And it seems in crunch time, end of first half, we have poor execution. End of second half, we have poor execution. And either it's guys are worn out from too many minutes, or we go back to just the basic offense that we're running, which everyone knows and has prepared the scouting report. There are times when maybe you need to run something or actions. I know the idea of sets and actions, but move people a little bit. And so I don't know. I don't have my finger on it, but Indiana does not execute well late in halves, even up 10 with the ball, I thought, in the first half, and went into halftime at 7. And so I just think there needs to be more concerted effort from the coaching staff to guide those guys in those late, and not just trust them to do stuff at the end, even though, winning time is usually players' time. You got to make shots and you got to make plays, but I think you can put them in good positions to do that. And I'm not sure Indiana does.
The problem is there's no bread and butter on this team offensively. Like, Trace Jackson Davis, he's not able to do what he was doing earlier on in the year. He's just not. The teams are just like, we're going to double or triple you, and we're going to make you dribble directly into us, and you have nowhere else to go with the ball. Unless Xavier Johnson has the ball and is able to get a lane and is willing to drive in and try to draw contact and get a layup, which is actually what we ended up seeing towards the end of this game that kept IU afloat. They don't have another reliable option. I mean, Race Thompson is more of a cleanup guy, and Miller Kopp and Parker Stewart have been completely inconsistent from outside. I mean, if you toss them either in the ball, even off action, you don't even know if they're going to get a shot up, let alone if it's going to go in. So, it's certainly you'd like to see more, and certainly, I'm sure the coaching staff could try to put something else in, but the players haven't performed in those times. And so you end up with this very stagnant looking offense whenever you're down to crunch time on the clock. And I don't know if there's a good answer at this point. You can't bring anybody off the bench in to do anything different at this point.
There's no closer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what we talked about so many other times, right? When the default setting of the team in late game is to throw the ball inside. And if he doesn't finish or find somebody else, then it's, then you see what happened today during that stretch where Trace really struggled. He seemed like as much as any of the guys, he kind of, was lax in that stretch on the defensive end and on offense. And it contributed to letting him back in it, versus you see, we were texting about this earlier, Trent Frazier at the end of the Illinois game is just like ready to rip the heart out of everybody in Michigan, and hit a huge 3 that was much tougher than many of the shots that IU took during the same stretch. And I think it's just a matter of how quickly can you get the guys that can do that to be in at the end of the game when you really have one guy that can create with the ball in his hands. But all right, we're going to take a break. There's a lot more positives that I want to get to in terms of how they built the lead, but I think we can do that in meaningful moments. So I'm going to we'll break, and then when we come back, we will continue breaking down IU's 5-point win at the Barn, and we'll point out some meaningful moments you might have missed, and then get inside the numbers. Listen to this.
Hi, this is AJ Moye. What's the only thing better than upsetting Duke in the Sweet 16? Celebrating it with friends afterwards. Join Jared, Andy, Ryan, and Coach for the assembly call after every IU basketball game. Go Hoosiers.
All right, and welcome back to the Assembly Call. This is your host, Andy Bottoms. I'm here with the coach, Brian Tonsoni, and Galen Clavio of Crimson Cast, and we are breaking down IU's 84-79 road win at Minnesota. And now it is time for
meaningful moments that you might have missed.
All right, lots of meaningful moments here, and want to use these a little bit to dive into some of the supporting cast for IU, because they did have a number of different guys step up. I think I counted 8 guys had at least 5 points in this game, which is about as balanced a scoring effort as we're probably going to see this team have, I would say. So first, let's talk Jordan Geronimo. A few moments from him for sure. He had a really good stretch in the second half. Kept the ball alive on a missed 3-pointer that ended up, kind of saving a possession for IU. But then and TJD eventually gets a putback. He got a dunk in transition on the very next possession, and then he had a great defensive play on a block a few possessions later where Battle, I think, felt like he had faked him out and was ready to go up for a shot, and he most definitely had not been faked out and was able to recover and block the shot there, and just thought he made a ton of great hustle plays. He ends up with 10 points for the game, hit a couple free throws in the first half. The only missed shot he had was a missed 3 that he took off of he's kind of made a habit of this, of making a really strong pass fake to the guy in the corner, and found himself with an open 3, took that shot, missed it, but did have 3 rebounds, 10 points as I mentioned, that block. Just thought he really gave great energy off the bench as IU needed him to come in, and he got to play some extended minutes because Race Thompson picked up his 3rd foul fairly early in the second half. So Geronimo got some extended run during that stretch. Didn't play a lot down the stretch of the game, but really thought he played well in his action tonight. Coach, thoughts on Geronimo coming off the bench?
I just love his energy and his athleticism. He just does a good job from that rebound tip basket that he had the other game to some actions around the rim. But his effort in rebounding, and sometimes we don't end up with the rebound, but boy, he has a quick bounce and he gets up and he gets it. And then I like the way, what he does offensively too. He has a nice shot. He has the ability to drive the lane and score around the rim. I just think his game is going to continue to grow, whether it grows to a bigger significant role this season or not. I'm not sure, but I like the lineup with him in at the 4 and Race at the 5, and not disrespecting TJD, but I think that's a good defensive alignment at the 4 and 5, and I think it spaces the floor and gives Race a chance to post up and do some things. But his effort, and if he ever makes a mistake, it's not because he's not trying to do something. It's his basketball experience or just his lack of understanding the collegiate game at this point. But it's never lack of effort. And Indiana has some guys on the bench that come in and do that. And tonight I just thought Geronimo was fantastic.
Yeah, Galen, thoughts on him? He's had a couple decent performances here recently, and I think he's a guy whose minutes have really ebbed and flowed over the course of the season. Hadn't been playing a ton, but really thought he stepped up tonight and had some solid minutes in the Maryland game as well.
This team really doesn't hit anywhere close to its full potential unless Jordan Geronimo is contributing over about a 10 to 15 minute stretch of every game. And I think that's one of the big problems they had during the losing streak was, the Illinois Northwestern games, he really didn't contribute very much in either of those. And then he barely played in the next 3 games. And look, he's still a relatively young player. And I think, it's important to remember that he's still learning the game to a large degree. He's still relatively raw. When you see a game like tonight, you're like, wow, why can't he do that all the time? But I think it's informative. You look at, he's had 2 games this season in Big Ten play where he scored double figures. One of them was against Nebraska on the road, and the other one was against Minnesota. Both teams that have a a less than aggressive stance when it comes to playing defense. And I think he does a lot better when he's playing against, less domineering post types, and he's able to move around and use his athleticism. He had some really nice plays. That rebound putback that should have been an and one towards the end was a really key play and helped to stem the tide a little bit. Look, I would love to see him continue to be able to contribute the way that he contributed tonight. I think he'll be a huge factor for IU one way or another against Rutgers. Because, to me, you've gotten such spotty play out of the post recently from IU that having a guy who can come in and at least grab some rebounds and maybe score somewhere between 4 to 8 points it's the difference between winning a game and not. And I think ultimately for IU, they're just thin at that position. And he's I wish he would stop shooting threes, but I like everything else that he's doing at this point.
Yeah, I agree. He's going to be really important. Just the way that Rutgers plays, the kinds of hustle plays that he makes are kind of staples of what you see from Rutgers. So if he's able to play in that game and make a few of those plays, I think that would certainly be huge. Miller Kopp, another guy, also scored in double figures, 10 points. I think they said that was his first double figure game since the Syracuse game back in November. And I thought, hit a couple threes. I was glad he was the guy who got fouled there during the 1-on-1. It spun out, missed the first one, but did go back and make a couple shortly thereafter. But I thought he had a couple good stretches as well. There was a play in the first half, the three he made there, the shot clock was running out. I think the ball had gotten tipped out of bounds, but he seemed to be the only guy to really recognize that the shot clock was about to run out, stepped up and just took one dribble, made a three, and then had a nice sequence, back-to-back possessions, gets a three on a great pass from Xavier Johnson in the corner that he made. And then right after that was able to put the ball on the floor, get to right about the free throw line, maybe 12 feet in, made another jumper there. So I think he started to be a little more assertive offensively in certain situations. I know they showed the one play as well where they had set something up for him. He comes off a screen and actually just didn't make a good pass to him, and kind of the somewhat exasperated look on his face as he caught the pass and couldn't really get into a shot. But I thought a positive performance from him. There was one of the threes he missed that I said out loud, I was like, that's the shot that you're here to make. But I thought in general, he continued to, show some improvement and show a little bit more life in some of these games as he's shown a bit more lately, which I think is a good sign for a team that struggles to put the ball in the basket. That, being able to have a game like this where you get a number of guys involved from a scoring standpoint, hopefully bodes well and makes this team a little bit more difficult to defend as opposed to just, relying so much on one or two guys. But Galen, thoughts on Kopp's play tonight?
I've been pretty critical of Miller Kopp over the course of the Big Ten season, but there really hasn't been a lot to be that critical about over the last 3 games. And again, similar to Jordan Geronimo, I think this team doesn't get anywhere close to its full potential without Miller Kopp contributing more than 6 points a game, which is he came in and that was right about his average. You just got to get more out of him because he's got the ability to shoot. He's got the ability to move, in properly in the offense. And sometimes when I watch this IU offense, it feels like there's only 3 people at any one time that know what's supposed to be going on. And Kopp generally looks like one of those people. It's been puzzling, frankly, the lack of offensive contributions he's had over the course of most of the Big Ten season. Like, it's shocking. It's shocking that a guy who came in as a shooter hasn't scored in double figures since the end of November. And yet here we are. Now it's nice to be able to put that to bed. I just think you need to see what you saw today out of Kopp, at least on the offensive end, sustained a bit more. And, he's had some struggles on defense occasionally too, but I thought he was okay on defense in this game also.
Yeah, I think this is a matchup where they didn't have anybody who could completely take advantage of what his shortcomings on the defensive side. I think the only real exception was the Sutherland guy that Minnesota brought in, whose only offensive move was to put his head down and drive to the basket, which worked pretty well in a number of cases. But that was a guy that Kopp struggled with. But otherwise, I think the way that Minnesota played allowed him to be able to play a little bit better on that end. Coach, thoughts on anything you saw IU doing differently to get Kopp a little bit more involved?
I've been happy the last 3 games with the player movement and the ball movement of Indiana. They're doing some different things. They They run a UCLA cut action and try to get some movement of the perimeters. They run some floppy action where a perimeter goes under the basket and then goes off either a single or double, and then the other perimeter comes out the other side. They're running a lot of inside cut action where they pass and cut inside. So, I just think that helps because it moves the defense. And then when you want to go back to your post isolation stuff, then the team has forgotten that whole scouting report, and you got to it's a variety of actions is what I like to see on offense, because they're all good and they're all designed to score points. But you put Miller Kopp on the move a little bit. And I know Tony did a thing where his percentile was low with on the move catches, but you can put people on the move to get them to get driving opportunities of the other players, to get your players that step in, stationary shooting. And I just think Indiana has really done that. I think Coach Woodson and staff, the last 3 games in the middle of their losing streak, are starting to understand that they can still do a lot of the stuff that they want to do and still move people. They run a little weave action at the beginning, at the top, just again to make that defense move enough to hope that it breaks down. So then you could put it in rotation and then maybe find scorers or find your post players. And I really think even back to the Ohio State game, I thought the movement and the design of stuff has been fantastic. And Indiana scores 84 points today. And again, it's Minnesota and we beat Maryland. So you got to be careful, but I thought they've played well enough offensively in spurts against Wisconsin, against Ohio State, to win some ball games. So I think it's coming around. Is it enough going forward? We'll see, because Rutgers is a solid defensive team, and you're going to have to continue to do some of those various movements in order to really stretch a solid defensive team.
Yeah, ask Ohio State just how good Maryland is after today. Maybe they're better than we thought.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, so want to talk defense, and then I'll hit you guys with any moments that you might have. There was the one possession, and they talked about this on the broadcast, but this is about midway through the first half. TJD ends up with a block on the play, but guys just scrambling, closing out the shooters, in rotation, but just tremendous effort on that defensive possession. You even heard, you could hear the bench get excited about it. And I think that was, it's unfortunate, although that the game ended the way that it did, because I think the way the defense played gets lost in how poorly they played down the stretch. And some of that is Minnesota's shot making, as we talked about. But I thought that possession was phenomenal. And for as bad as IU's defense was toward the end, for the first 14 possessions of the second half, IU gave up 5 points. And so they went on a stretch where they gave up about 2 points per possession for about half of the second half. So not saying the defense was perfect, but I thought there were some great defensive moments where they covered for one another and really played well, played incredibly hard, that unfortunately gets overshadowed and to a certain extent, rightfully so, by the way that they played down the stretch. But Coach, just you're a lover of defense, I know. So I'm sure that stuff was fantastic for you to watch. But just overall thoughts on the defense. We kind of talked about what happened down the stretch, but overall thoughts on the defense for the first 33 minutes of the game.
Yeah, the defense was fantastic tonight. The one issue that they had trouble, and I don't know what the scouting report rule was on that, but they were switching a little bit of off ball and ball screens tonight, and they were switching flat, and Minnesota was sitting down on the backside of that after they come off those screens and sitting down and shooting threes. And I saw Coach Woodson, I think TJD did it one time. I think Parker Stewart, Miller Kopp, they were switching flat at the level of the screen instead of up on shooters. So, Indiana was up 40-33, but really they gave Minnesota some open looks. So I thought the defense was solid again tonight, especially that stretch in the second half where the lead got extended. It was fantastic. But that was the one issue of they were switching more of those screens, but they weren't switching aggressively. And then I thought the start of the second half, they were doing that better. I thought it was one of the better adjustments Coach Woodson made at halftime, was to switch more aggressively and to cover out so they can't do what we call sit down on the backside of screens. And then I thought the off the ball defense was fantastic. And Parker Stewart twice got in and disrupted plays that were thrown over the top, backside help, and got a deflection, if not a steal on one, and then a steal on another. I thought it was, he gets a lot of grief because he struggles guarding the bounce, but both he and Miller Kopp give maximum effort on the defensive side. And even when they're beat, they try to have it contested twos. So, yeah, you cannot fault this team. Maybe the last 6 or 7 minutes for lack of focus, but when they're focused, their strength has been defense all year long, and that's what has kept them in games, even the games that they've lost. And tonight, it was pretty solid.
Galen, other moments stand out for you, whether it be a certain player or stretch of the game?
Gosh, I mean, it all kind of goes into a blur there. It's like, which game do we want to talk about? The game that Indiana won by 30 or the game that Indiana lost by 28 or whatever? But no, I'd say what sticks out to me more than anything else, though, I think, is the way that this team was able to establish a flow on offense there for a while that just felt organic and natural. And, as I said in the first half, it kind of felt like we were visiting the red light district of basketball. Like we weren't supposed to be here. We didn't know. It's like, wait, what? We're far away from home here. How does this feel? And it does kind of remind you that used to be commonplace. You used to see Indiana hitting a lot of shots. The defense was the larger issue. So we kind of got the full experience of like a Crean era game. It felt like in this one in a lot of ways. I mean, this was, I think Ryan Karatza had the stat earlier. This was Indiana's second highest points per possession output that they've had all season, and it was like 1.22 points per possession. I think the Merrimack game was the only one that was higher. And the fact that they did that despite not really scoring that much down the stretch in the second half just illustrates, when this team is clicking, they are a pretty good offensive team. They have guys that can knock down shots. They have a bunch of different ways to score. So that's probably what stuck out to me the most, even though it's like one of those things where you look at it, you're like, is there any chance we could repeat this a couple of times before the season's over? And I'm not totally sure if that's possible given who they're playing the remainder of the season, but it was nice to see for a change.
Yeah, it was crazy. I talked about the splits on the defensive side. They were just as stark on the offensive side. So there was IU had 36 possessions in the second half. They scored 30 points on the first 19. So that's almost 1.6 points per possession. And then they scored 14 in the last 17. So 0.82. So about half of what they did early. So, everything is clicking in the first part of the half in terms of the offense looks as good as it has. The defense was playing so well. And just crazy that the drop of a hat, how things can change for this team. Although, again, I don't know that we should be incredibly surprised by that at this point. Coach, any other meaningful moments from you?
No, the Parker Stewart one I wrote down because he has been struggling on defense. I thought his backside help at the start of the second half was really important. I thought playing basketball off 2 feet is just tremendous. And I thought Xavier Johnson did a great job of that. We look at his points and his assists and rebounds, and those are great, fantastic stat lines. But he played the game from a guard's perspective that was just tremendous. And those assists, he had that fast break assist to Kopp for a 3, I believe. And we've talked about the other ones to Geronimo and Tamar. That's Villanova's guards do a great job. If you want to watch good guard play, watch Villanova. They jump, they drive in the lane, they pivot, they find scores. And Xavier Johnson really did that well tonight. So his footwork tonight, I thought was outstanding. And that helped him have a very productive night.
All right, well, let's transition, go inside the numbers here. This segment, as always, sponsored by the Power Rank, where our friend Ed uses data and analytics to make accurate football and college basketball predictions. He also writes an incredible March Madness guide every year, which will have a special offer for you on once March rolls around. But for now, if you want sports betting advice with a PhD edge, or if you just like understanding sports at a more analytical level, you should subscribe to Ed's free newsletter. You can do that by going to thepowerrank.com/AC to subscribe. Again, that's thepowerrank.com/AC. All right, let's go inside the numbers here. We talked about some of the point per possession numbers. Galen, I'll throw it to you first. What numbers stand out to you as you look down the stat sheet here?
I think the biggest ones for me, as I look down the stat sheet hurriedly here, since you threw it to me at a time I didn't think, but it's clearly that you take Rob Finney and Michael Durr out, and almost every player for IU averaged over a point per possession on offense. Parker Stewart was almost there. He was at a 98, but everybody else was significantly over the 1 point per possession mark. And Jordan Geronimo was probably the shining light there at 174, which is really good. I mean, that is, I used this possession and it scored me points, and that's what you want out of that. And that's just not something we see very often out of this IU team. I think that when you combine it with Indiana being able to score, again, almost a point and a quarter per possession, and again, not turn the ball over that much. I mean, they had 10 turnovers on the night, but that's only a turnover percentage of about 15%. If they can keep doing that, I think they've got a pretty good chance of winning games down the stretch here. They've really solved, I think, a significant amount of their turnover issues, and they continue to do so. And it's always a concern, but that having the ability to hold on to the basketball has always been a big part of what this team needed to do if it was going to get better on offense. And I think we've seen both in the last game and in this game, it can lead to some good things and some higher efficiency numbers.
Yeah, Coach, what numbers stand out to you?
Well, we've talked a lot about him, but 8 assists in a game where a guard scores 24 points. I think that combination of minutes. And then Parker Stewart, I'm not a big plus minus guy, but Ryan needs to get something on here. So, but Parker Stewart was plus 15 for his time there with 5 rebounds, and then 47.6% shooting from 3. I know that's probably not sustainable over time, and maybe that was just a one-off type of situation. But again, I just think the pace of the offense is better with movement. I think Indiana decided to run tonight, whether that was scouting report against Minnesota or not. I liked seeing the faster pace of offense. I think that, again, forces defenses not to be set. And I think early we tried to do that and turned the ball over 87 times against Marshall or whatever that was, and then we backed off a little bit and tried to slow it down because turnovers, or it might have been Louisiana, I think one of those games we had 27 turnovers, something like that. And so I'm glad to see us getting back to some of that pace, because it's hard to set your defense in transition, and you can find, I mean, we talked about those few plays that were made in transition for buckets. We see that all the time when you watch college basketball. So I think that the better shooting is because you're getting less contested shots, and you're doing that because of pace, and you're doing that because there's a little more movement where the defense is struggling to guard Indiana, and we're maximizing our ability, which is, a little bit above average, or average, if you want to say, compared to other college basketball teams. That's the positive going forward. Now you got to do it against a pretty good Rutgers team who's also fighting for an NCAA berth, and then you got to go into Purdue, and then you got the Big Ten tournament. So, 3 games in a row, I think Indiana's offense has been pretty good, but 47.6% shooting, and multiple guys, especially Rob Finney. I know his offensive production wasn't good. He's coming back off after a long layoff. He was rusty, but he still went 2 for 4 from 3, had 8 points, did some things. His passing was a little bit off. That's to be expected when a guy hasn't had game action for a long period of time. But if he can come back and do that in his first game and just keep getting better and better, those offensive numbers are good to look at.
Yeah, I think if you look, Finney was one I was going to point out. He gets to play 9 minutes. I don't know what, if any, kind of minutes restriction he was on, but I certainly didn't expect him to play a ton. But good to see him get back out there. I thought, to your point, Coach, looked a little rusty from a passing standpoint. I thought defensively, though, looked pretty good. Seemed to be moving pretty well, which I think, coming off of a foot injury is what you're looking for just about as much as anything. Had a nice drive to the basket in the first half where he was able to score at the hoop and then hit a couple threes in the second half. So good to see him back out there. Figure out how, can he continue to build on that in some of these games coming up where they're going to need his defense on the floor and at least give some other options with Galloway still out of there. Interestingly, Coach, I thought the same thing as you about the pace, but Minnesota outscored IU in fast break points 16-5. I don't know how many of those were just hurrying it up the floor and gunning threes in the second half. But bench
It
points,
felt like we had more on the break than that.
I thought so too. But
see, that shows you what coaches know. They know nothing. Like I watched that game and took notes and didn't pick that up.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought. I
still
that
think it's a pace thing of cutting and moving. As much as transition, we're just moving faster.
Yeah, I agree. I would have thought the same thing. If you told me it was 16-5, I would have guessed it was flipped the other way around. Bench points, IU outscores Minnesota 23-13. Minnesota not particularly deep, so I don't know if that's surprising, but I think it underscores the contributions that IU did get off of the bench. Tamar Bates had 5 points, had some nice moments in the first half. I think defensively struggled a little bit in the second. We talked about Geronimo, we talked about Finney in that regard. Minnesota, just if you look at their shot distribution, they took 58 field goals, 36 of them were threes. In the second half, they took 10 twos compared to 21 threes. Now, a component of that is falling behind and doing some of those things. But, yeah, they end up shooting 42.9% for the game from three. Again, I thought a number of those were contested. IU did let them get at least a little bit comfortable, but pretty interesting to see the way they divvied up the shots where they had them overall. But, I think otherwise, I think you guys hit most of the ones that stood out to me in terms of numbers. I guess let's talk TJD real quick because we really haven't mentioned him at all, and maybe we can lump Race in this discussion as well. Those two combined for 22 points, 14 for Trace, 8 for Race, 8 rebounds for TJD, 6 for Race. Trace had 3 assists, I think maybe by the first media timeout. He finished with 3 assists on the game as well. 3 turnovers, which all came really close together during that stretch late in the game. Couple blocks, couple steals, so a little bit of everything for him. And then Race, as I mentioned, got the couple early fouls in the second half. Sat for a little while, but did come back for the stretch run and had that dunk off the assist from Parker Stewart. So, Galen, overall thoughts on the starting front court from IU? Those two guys have typically been anchors for IU, and I don't know if it's telling or not that we're 50 plus minutes in and we really haven't mentioned either of those guys too much. I guess maybe overall it's a good sign for the IU offense, but overall impressions of their play tonight.
I mean, I thought Race was fine. It was not the type of game I thought that Race Thompson could make the same sorts of contributions that he normally made. This was going to be a game that was going to be that you turn into a game that had a lot of outside shooting, a lot of driving to the basket. And so for what he had to work with, I thought he was fine. I thought his rebounding was timely, and I thought he played pretty consistently throughout most of the game. Trace was kind of it was a tale of two games for Trace Jackson Davis. I thought he started off strong. I thought his early moves to the basket offensively were really impressive, and he looked like he was building up a nice head of steam and was, going to maybe be on his way to a double-double or, at the very least scoring 20 points or so. And then he really looked like he lost a lot of focus on both ends of the floor on the last 10 minutes of the game. And that really bothers me a bit with Trace, because ultimately this team is going to go as far as Trace Jackson Davis takes it. And when he switches off, I think that has an effect on the rest of the team. And unfortunately, fortunately it didn't hurt anything this time around, but I do worry about it because he does not seem like the same player that he was a couple of months ago, just from an energy and focus perspective. And so, maybe this is just like February doldrums, and maybe he'll come out of it as we get into these last two games or the regular season of the Big Ten. But, I thought that the lack of playing a 40-minute game was a little bit of a concern. I don't think it's like a panic button sort of thing, but it's something I'd like to see him rectify in this game against Rutgers coming up.
Yeah, I'm concerned about Trace Jackson Davis' overall play in the last 7-8 games. It's been less than ideal, and everyone goes through slumps. Sometimes you go through physical slumps. Sometimes you go through mental slumps. It's a heavy burden when you're the All-American and you're expected to carry the load every night. That's not easy, but that's been granted to him or given to him or expected, whatever. And then he has the options to do with it what he needs to do. But the focus issue, Galen, is 100% concerning from my vantage point as well. Just those last 3 catches, he came back in, and the game was at 25-24 at that point when he replaced Durr at 7, and he wasn't. Yeah, it's easy too when you're up 25 not to feel a sense of urgency, but it's still not good. There is no excuse for that. And he let the ball slip out of his hands a couple times, but you've seen that way too many times, whether it's the foul situation, and Jared's mentioned it all the time, that he gets 2 fouls and he sits, and then he comes back in the second half and it's a little bit of something bad's happened to me. And he doesn't reach down deep and then make the adjustments to fight it in appropriate ways. He just allows stuff to happen to him. And then some of it is that people have taken away his bread and butter, and he doesn't have a whole lot of other skills to go to. You saw him take that 15-foot jumper, and he really just shot putted it. He didn't shoot it like a regular shooter. And it's obvious that if Coach Woodson says that he's supposed to shoot those or can, and he doesn't, that he lacks confidence. And even really talented players can have a confidence issue. And so, I'm not down there all the time. I don't know what's going on. But, yeah, he has, other than the Wisconsin game where he had 30, he has not been the dominant player that we all expected to be. And let's hope that's, that he can wash that out of his system and have a good run here at the end of the season.
All right. Well, coming up here on the Assembly Call, we're going to hand out our game balls and the Hoosier Hustle Award. We'll have some bracketology discussion. And that's all next to Assembly Call.
This is Nick Zeisloft. I never miss an open three, and I never miss an episode of the Assembly Call.
Also, make sure you sign up for our free IU Hoops email newsletter. Over 9,000 of your fellow IU fans have subscribed. You can join for free today at join.assemblycall.com. Again, that's join.assemblycall.com. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Coach Brian Tonsoni and Galen Clavio of Crimson Cast, and we are breaking down Indiana's 84-79 victory over Minnesota. And now it's time for game balls. I feel like this, not unlike the last game, will be an easy one. So, Galen, I'll throw it to you first.
I'm just going to say Xavier Johnson. Like there's no other choice here. He was absolutely the reason IU won the game. His ability all over the floor was a turning point, I think, from the get-go. And I felt the most comfortable with the ball in his hands of anybody on the floor for IU the entire game. So easy choice for me. I don't think there's anybody else that comes even remotely close.
Yep, I would tend to agree. Coach, same?
Agree. Just fantastic effort by the young man again. And for me, it's the stats are easy to look at and say that he played a good game, but it's how he's doing it. The mistakes are a lot, far and few between. His play is with poise. You always worry about him getting a little too emotional and at officials or other players or whatever else. But I just think that he's, in the last couple games, has just really played with a lot of poise. As I mentioned before, fundamentally was fantastic tonight with his game. And that with an awesome stat line just makes it easy game ball.
Yeah, I would agree. This one is about as easy as they get. Thought he really set the tone in the first half, and then he was the guy to close it out down the stretch with the free throws, and just continues to string together solid performances, which is exactly what this team needs at this point in the season when they've got some critical games coming up. So make it unanimous. Xavier Johnson gets the game ball. On to the Hoosier Hustle Award, which will be maybe a few other options to look at for this. The Hoosier Hustle Award is sponsored by our friends over at Evansville Security Services. Based in the hometown of IU legend Calbert Chaney, Evansville Security Services provides off-duty police officers to businesses and individuals throughout Indiana. Remember, prevention cannot be measured, so let Evansville Security Services help you prevent a bad outcome today. Go to evansvillesecurityservices.com to learn more. Again, that's evansvillesecurityservices.com. All right, Coach, I'll give you first crack at this one. Who gets your Hoosier Hustle Award tonight?
There's two choices for me. One is Geronimo. The other is Parker Stewart. Being the defensive guy, I really love the two steals, the two backside help of Parker Stewart. I think that, he has been struggling to find himself all year offensively and even defensively in his role on the team and all that kind of stuff. I just thought it was a quiet but efficient effort tonight for him on both ends of the floor. So I think I'm going to go with Parker Stewart. I also could easily go with Geronimo, but my nomination is going to be Parker Stewart.
All right, Galen, what about you?
Yeah, I had the same two. I'll go the other direction because I think it's pretty close. Like as much as Parker Stewart's contributions came in those steals, and again, I thought he did play fairly well defensively. Jordan Geronimo's efforts on offense, on the boards, I thought were really important at key moments and at a position that IU desperately needed them in. So, again, close call there, but I will go with Geronimo barely over Stewart.
All right. Well, I appreciate
there you go, Andy.
I appreciate you guys conspiring to leave it to me to break the tie. So I always appreciate that. I'm going to go with Geronimo. I think he continues to be a guy that I'd like to see a little bit more of. And I thought the minutes that he gave in the second half when Race had to go out with 3 fouls, I think we look at all the things that Race does for the team, and anytime he's not on the floor, you get a little concerned. As it turned out, we had reason to get concerned later, but not in that exact moment. But I thought Geronimo came in, gave some good minutes there, really in both halves. Solid performance for him. So I will give it to Jordan for the Hoosier Hustle Award. All right. So now is typically time we look at our lingering question, which I think at this point is almost entirely centered around bracketology and where IU fits in the overall scheme of the bubble. So we'll talk through that for a minute, and maybe what to look for in these next few games. I guess I would qualify all this with, it's not just what you do, it's what others around you do. And as we saw yesterday, there was a ton of losses for people at the top of the seed list, but the net effect of that was fairly minimal change because everybody lost. On the bubble, I'd say it's a little bit different story because it seemed to me that fewer teams that were right around the cut line actually lost. Now, save for SMU really getting blown out today, Oregon losing late against USC last night, but most of the bubble teams kind of held serve, which is essentially what IU did as well. So, Coach, I'll throw this one to you first. I guess 2 questions, and Galen, I'll ask you the same too. One, where do you at Delphi have IU right now, or as of when you did your latest list, and what do you think they need to do over the remainder of the season to feel a little bit safer than they do today?
We had a big meeting last Wednesday and put out our list on Friday, but a lot of things happened since then. So for those listening, I do a total refresh every day. So I don't look at a team on one line and then have to move them down for a loss and up for a wins or whatever. So I make sure I just look at total resume for total body of work. That's my way of doing it. It's a little difficult to, go 1 through 68 every time. It'd be much easier just to move a team up and down. But I totally refresh once the net rankings come out, totally upload the data brand new and start going 1 through 68. As of Friday, we had Indiana out, either first team out or second team out. But now in looking over things this weekend and seeing some of the results of this weekend, I think Indiana's on the 11 seed line. And depending what is your emphasis as a committee member, Indiana is either out or they're at the top of the 11 seed line, maybe even could get the bottom of a 10 seed line. If the committee is all about quality of wins, then I think Indiana stacks up against some of the other bubbles because they have, the win against Ohio State, the win against Purdue, Notre Dame, the St. John's win is looking better. If you're just looking at things that have typically the committee's looked at, strength of schedule, non-conference schedule is down the road. You only had 3 road wins. The net is okay. But you're looking at a 6-10 record in quad 1 and 2, which is not, it doesn't keep you out, but it's not great. So it puts you in competition, and I think Notre Dame moving to a quad 1 and hopefully Notre Dame staying in 50 just makes the resume look better. That way you don't have to discuss Notre Dame. You just know it's a quad 1 win. So we moved them back in today before Indiana played. We moved Indiana back in comparing to SMU, who lost earlier. We moved them back in, but just as quickly they can move back out before they play on Tuesday. That's how treacherous it is to be on this backside of the bubble. And then conference tournaments start. And if, Murray State gets beat, that's a bid thief. And so you have one less place for an at-large team, and Indiana's going to be sweating the conference tournaments. Last year, Georgetown came out of nowhere to win. Oregon State came out of nowhere. Those two teams were not going to be at-larges and took 2 spots away. So Indiana has to deal with that. That being said, your second question, I think Indiana has to beat Rutgers, must beat Rutgers, compete well against Purdue, and then probably win the 8-9 game in the Big Ten. And that rivals what Ohio State did in 2019 when it was Ohio State, Indiana. The winner of that 8-9 game is probably going to go. And Ohio State went at 19-14. I think Indiana's resume is going to be somewhat similar to that. I think Indiana gets in with an 11 seed if they win 2 more games. Would love it to be the first 2 they play. That would seal it, I think, for me.
Galen, I believe I saw either on Friday or at some point over the weekend, you had put out a set of bracket projections. So I guess same 2 questions to you.
I actually did it this morning. It's the first bracket of the year for me. I like to wait till
I've lost all track of time. You could have told me it was Friday, and I clearly would have believed you. But it was 12 hours ago. But I'm good.
I like to smell March a little bit before I actually do my first bracket. This makes it feel more real. But yeah, I had Indiana in. They were my last non-play-in game at-large team. So they were 5th in the list there for at-larges. But much like Coach said, I don't really know what the committee's going to go with. You look at a team like Rutgers, who Lunardi has in ahead of Indiana, and it's like, well, you can't really have both. Like, you either value Rutgers, who has a lot of wins but has a terrible net, or you value Indiana, who doesn't have nearly as many wins, but their metrics and their predictives are all significantly better than Rutgers. I hate it when you see bracketologists try to look smart on national television by basically disobeying their own criteria. That's another rant for a different podcast. But I look at, like, if the committee really likes the Rutgers profile, I think Indiana's in trouble because there's no way they're going to be able to rally on that front. And there's teams like, Creighton and some of these teams that are in the 60s. Miami, I think, falls into this category, who are just going to have more wins than Indiana. And there's not a lot Indiana can do about it other than making a deep run in the Big Ten tournament, which, let's be honest, historically seems kind of unlikely. That said, I think, they don't have to beat Rutgers, but they have to win one of their last 2 games in the regular season, and they have to win their first Big Ten tournament game. I think those, because if they beat Purdue and lose to Rutgers, they're going to get in. And if they beat Rutgers and lose to Purdue, but they beat Michigan, who I think is almost certainly going to be their 8-9 opponent, then they're going to get in. So that's really what it comes down to. Like, the Rutgers game becomes the pivotal game of the whole season. And if they win that, they're going to have, what are they? Are they at, on the season at that point, they are 19 wins. They're 10 wins in conference. Even if they lost their next 2, I have a hard time seeing the committee leaving a 10-10 Big Ten team that has multiple wins against tier 1 squads out of the tournament. That just seems unlikely to me, given what we've seen out of committees in the past. It's not impossible. It just seems highly improbable.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the Rutgers game, I think we can all probably agree is a must win, because right now Rutgers is in quad 3 because their net is in the mid 80s. At this point. So I think IU needs to beat Rutgers and then probably hope Rutgers plays well against whoever it plays to kind of get itself back into at least like a quad 2 situation. But the Rutgers IU comparison is an odd one because you're just trying to figure out what the committee would like. If you're just looking at sheer volume of quality wins and tournament teams you beat, then it's Rutgers hands down. The challenge is Rutgers has most of their losses to teams that aren't anywhere near the field, which is typically something that the committee values as well. And while IU has a few of those, despite having no losses in quad 3 or quad 4, the number is substantially lower. And if you believe in any of the metrics, whether they be the predictive or the resume metrics, IU is better than Rutgers in both, I believe. So we'll be interested to see. I tend to fall in line with what Coach is saying in terms of, the Rutgers win feels like a must because you then can kind of have that clean profile and not lose a quad 3 or quad 4 game. The Purdue game, you're kind of hoping that a win there, I think, would seal it almost no matter what happens, just because that'd be such a huge road win for this team. The problem is if you take bad losses, it brings into play, it makes IU's blemishes more prominent, I guess is what I would say. So you look at the non-conference strength of schedule, that's not very good. You look at the road record that got helped a little bit tonight, but in general is not great. But the Notre Dame win moving to quad 1, as we mentioned, is an important one. So we'll see what happens there. I guess that brings up the only other thing to touch on before we go. Obviously, the Rutgers game will be the next show that we have, but it's probably at a point where you can start to look ahead a little bit to the Big Ten tournament, because if you believe they need to win a game there, it probably is worth trying to figure out who they might be playing when they get there. So at this point, they seem highly likely, based on what I'm looking at, to end up in the 8-9 game one way or another. They're currently 9th based on what I'm looking at, right behind Michigan at 9-8 and Rutgers at 10-8. Michigan's got a few games left. I think they will get to 20. Rutgers will as well. And then there's a little bit of a gap between IU and Penn State. Penn State still travels to Illinois. So feels like IU's locked into that, short of winning both the last 2 games. And it also feels like the likely opponents there are one of Rutgers or Michigan, which both of whom are fairly close to IU on any kind of seed list or bubble. So maybe it's if you win that game, then you kind of knock somebody else out. But, Galen, any other, like I said, maybe you've looked a little bit more than I have at who the potential opponents are, what the schedules are for some of the teams they might play, and how that could shuffle up. But that's at least what it looks like to my quick glance here.
My life is sad that I've done this much investigation into the Big Ten tournament potential spread. But look, at this point,
it's really for the good of the show. So we appreciate it. You can't, I don't want you to feel bad.
I just feel bad about myself more than anything else. I think that's the big thing. But no, look, at this point, Rutgers has 2 games left, and that's Indiana on the road, and they've got Penn State at home. It's certainly possible Rutgers could lose both games, but it seems, I guess, a little bit unlikely to me that they're going to lose at home to Penn State, especially if Penn State decides to bring the team that they played Nebraska with tonight, where they lost by 30 on their home floor or whatever it was. Michigan's an interesting case because that's the other team that potentially Indiana's going to play. But you figure Michigan right now, they're 9-8 in conference. They have Michigan State at home on Tuesday. They have Iowa at home on Thursday. They have Ohio State on the road on Sunday. They could easily lose all 3 of those games, which, the only real effect that would have, I think, would be that Indiana would wear the white uniforms in the 8-9 game as opposed to the Reds. But it would have another effect, I think, which is that Michigan would be bone tired, having lost 4 in a row against 4 of the top teams in the conference, and then have to turn around and play a Wednesday game, I guess. A Thursday game? Whatever the game is that they're playing Indiana. And it'd be the first game that they'd have their coach back, which might be a good thing, might not. I'm not 100% sure. But that's about it for Indiana. I think there's one small mathematical chance that they might be able, if they won the Purdue game and Rutgers lost their game, that they could sneak into that 7 seed. But that's really the only other option for IU, other than losing both games and ending up in the 10.
Yeah, I'm not even sure at this point if they would end up in the 10. I guess you never know what'll happen, but I took a glance. You've clearly done more research than I have. And if they win both, like maybe there's a slight chance they get a little bit better, but I guess worry about Rutgers first and then figure out what happens from there. So, all right, well, that will become more clear by the time we talk again on Wednesday night after the Rutgers game. That one is at 7:00 Eastern time. We'll then have Assembly Call Radio on Thursday to be able to maybe talk about some of the ramifications of whatever goes down against Rutgers, and then the regular season finishes up on Saturday at Purdue, which I believe is a 2:00 start that they announced, if I'm remembering that correctly. All right. So with that, we will wrap things up. Before we do that, just a reminder to check out our friends at Home Field Apparel. Use the promo code HOME at checkout to get 15% off your first order. And guys, it's time for last call. Galen, I'll throw it to you first. Final thoughts on IU's 5-point win at Minnesota.
It was a 5-point win at Minnesota. And that's about all that we need at the end of the day. Like, they won the game on the road. They needed a road win. They needed a win away from home. They're up to 4 now on the season, which is nice. And they needed to get a little bit closer to 500 in the conference and 20 wins overall. This is your classic let us never speak of this again type of game for IU. And it feels like we've had a few too many of those over the course of time. But I'm just happy that they came away with the victory, and ultimately, hopefully that propels them to another win coming up this week.
Coach, final thoughts.
Yeah, these last couple of games have given us a look into what Indiana can be, and it's also frustrating because where's that been, down the stretch of some of these other games, and we'd be breathing a lot easy when it comes to tournament selection time. But if they continue playing the way they did for the first 32 minutes, then it looks like they can compete very well on Wednesday, and then go into West Lafayette and do whatever they can do, and it just feels a little bit better. It's not completely okay, and the program is still not where it needs to be, but these last 2 games have really, and at least let us take a pause after a 5-game losing streak by winning a couple. And again, winning in the Big Ten is tough. Winning in basketball is tough. Winning on the road is tough. So would rather have been a lot easier coming down the stretch than it was, but it is a win, and it is a quad 2 win. So it puts us in position to get in a tournament, and ultimately that's what we need. Now the players and coaches just have to go and get it done.
Yeah, I echo a lot of what you guys said. It was a situation where they had to get a win, and they got one, and there were times that it was beautiful, and there are times that it was horrendous. And the net result, though, is what IU needed to get done. And so it makes the game on Wednesday incredibly important for this team. And we now wait a few days to see if they were able to show up and take advantage of that opportunity. But the Wednesday game means a whole lot less if they don't win this game tonight. And so they stepped up, did what they needed to do, found a way to close the game out. Another great game from Xavier Johnson. And again, we've talked about the ceiling of this team, and where they end up is very heavily reliant upon how he plays. And over the last few games, he's really stepped up his game and continued to just improve over the course of the season. And we'll need another big one from him on Wednesday night for sure against Rutgers. But if they can do that, then I think it has a chance to change the tone of the season a little bit, heading into a really tough road game at Purdue to close things out. But excited to see what this team is able to do, and ultimately glad they were able to win the game tonight, albeit in an odd fashion. I saw somebody in the chat joked about this game had basically 3 halves to it, and it was dependent upon which of those you really looked at as to how you'd feel about the game. But ultimately, they took care of business. That's the important thing, and that is what I will take away from the game tonight. As I understand it, I've had some issues with speaking over the drops in the music, so I'm not going to play the music over this one, just in case. But that'll do it for tonight's show. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel over at youtube.com/assemblycall. And don't forget to join Assembly Call. Go to join.assemblycall.com to join our free email newsletter. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for the music you hear on the show, and special thanks to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logo. And thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops with you again on Wednesday night after the Rutgers game. Until then, keep your elbows in, eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out. I like everything about that.
All right, gents. I think that closes it up.
This was too detailed to get into in the Big Ten tournament thing, but the outside scenario for IU getting the 10 seed involves the following things happening. Okay. Wisconsin has to finish alone in the lead of the Big Ten. Illinois and Purdue have to tie for second place by themselves, and Penn State and Indiana have to tie at 9 and 11. Under that scenario, actually Penn State gets the 9 and Indiana gets the 10, because Penn State is 1-1 against Illinois and Purdue, and Indiana is 1-2 in that scenario against Illinois and Purdue. So there you go.
Yeah, that would also require Penn State to win at both Illinois and Rutgers, though. So,
Yes, correct.
So,
Which,
seems
stranger
unlikely.
thing, man. But I mean,
Absolutely.
If you were going to pick a team to not trust in a key game at home late in the season, Illinois would be among the top teams for me. But yeah,
that they would. And yeah, the other thing, I know somebody mentioned that it is senior night on Wednesday. I know we typically have not come on until after the speeches. I think this year more than any, it is entirely unclear to me who will actually be going through that, given all the eligibility pieces of things. So I'm assuming that we'll have a better handle on that as we get closer to the game, and then we'll figure it out. Assuming there is some kind of post-game ceremony, we will wait till after that's over to come on. It's just not totally clear to me right now who will or won't go through that. So we'll kind of monitor that as we go. And I know the women's team, at least, they kind of announced some of that of who would be going through it and who wouldn't, based on who was coming back. So I assume you'll see some of the same thing for the men. So we'll figure that out as we go. But we'll certainly talk to everybody at some point on Wednesday night after the game. It just depends a little bit on what actually happens. So, all right. Well, I think that'll do it. Galen, appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Glad we didn't have to. Glad we could talk about a win despite the things that went down over the remainder of it. I'm not sure. I don't know what would have happened had we needed to get on and talk about it if the collapse completed itself. So luckily we didn't have to figure that out. But anyway, so all right, Coach, good chatting with you. We'll I don't know who among us will be on Wednesday night. I think I will be. But I'm not exactly sure
we
who
got our
else, so.
sectional game Wednesday night.
All
So
right,
we'll be
well,
playing the same time that IU is.
Awesome. Well, best of luck in your game.
Thank you.
And, I know you got a lot of people I see on Twitter following the Western account and rooting for you guys. So best of luck as you get things started.
We got our hands number 5 team in the state. We drew in the sectional. So
lucky you.
We're gonna have to play well.
Yeah. All right. Well, good luck. Good luck.
Thanks.
So, all right. Cool. Thanks everybody for joining us. We will talk to you on Wednesday night.